We're live.
Hey, amazing. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to celebrate these two amazing authors we have with us. My name's Ariana. I'm the events coordinator here at LSA, and I am joined today with author Jodi McAllister, author of Not Here to Make Friends. If we were in person, there would be applause. And then also here with us today is the amazing author Kylie Scott, author of Text Appeal. And we are here today to celebrate both of these two novels and to talk with both of these lovely authors. Just a bit of logistics before we get started. I will go ahead and have a conversation with these two wonderful authors for about 45 minutes. In between that time, feel free to put questions in the chat. And then the last 15 minutes of the event is where I'll go ahead and have the authors answer all of those questions. So Jodi, Kylie, if you're ready, I'll just jump right in.
I'm
Um,
good.
Great. So I know some authors don't like doing it, but if you could give a little summary of your book, a little elevator pitch, if you will, for the people who haven't read, that would be amazing to start.
Go, Jody.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I live and work on their lands, and sovereignty was never ceded. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Now, let me tell you about my book, Not Here to Make Friends. This is set on a season of a show that is definitely not The Bachelor. Why would you ever think it was The Bachelor? That's ridiculous. Please don't sue me, ABC. And it is a romance between the season's villain up here and down here, her producer, who is pining for her. They may have something of a history. I'm also an academic, and one of the many things I study in my academic life is The Bachelor. So all my knowledge has been poured into this little book, and I had a great time writing it.
Fantastic. I live and work on the lands of the Yagara people, and ta-da! Text Appeal is about romance writer Riley, who's always dreamed of living by the sea, and she's been getting lots of spam calls on her phone, so she gets a new number, but the new number actually used to belong to the town hot guy who just wants everyone to leave him alone for a bit, and all of a sudden she's getting messages for him and all sorts of stuff, and they get enmeshed.
Love both of those. They sound so great, so intriguing. And then, kind of in line with that, what inspired you to write these novels? Because I know some authors have like novels like saved up and then they just write them eventually. Some people say it comes in a dream. What has inspired these two novels?
You go first,
Doing
Kylie.
fake, yeah, I love doing fake dating. I love sticking them in each other's faces and going, you have to get along and pretend that you're more than that. And it's so awkward. Fake dating is so fantastically awkward. I really live for it. What about you, Jody?
Yeah, well, this one obviously, like I said, I've spent a lot of time researching The Bachelor, so there's that factor. But my kind of broader academic career, I work in the field of popular romance studies, so I study a lot of romance novels as well. And I have spent years and years and years of my life thinking about how love stories fit together. And in this one, Murray, the producer down here, he's running the whole show, so it's his job to construct this love story on The Bachelor between two contestants who, well, you know, the lead and the contestant who I will tell you now are not into each other. And so all these like big thoughts I have about how we think love stories fit together versus what love should look like, that was when what love actually looks like is underpinning a lot of this. And I had a great time like playing with those contrasts.
Isn't that the cool thing about romance? I mean, there's no two love stories are the same because you've got these different personalities bouncing off each other. It makes it so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is this like little gap sometimes between what we think love should look like and what love does look like. Like a romance novel I would love to read one day, but I've never found one, is one where the protagonists just straight up meet on a dating app. Like so many people have that as their real life love story, but as a romance novel, that's so hard to construct because where's the conflict? You met on a dating app, you like each other, now you're in love, the end. Like I love kind of playing with some of those like really real world questions. Like, what does love look like in the real world? And how can we actually tell a story about that?
They're trying to convince readers that actually these two people, they're going to make each other's lives so much better in all these ways, and they fit together so interestingly, and but they challenge each other, right? Because
Mm,
otherwise it's not interesting if they don't change you and challenge you. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
And I
cool.
don't necessarily need them to make each other better people. Like, I mean, she's the villain, he's a producer. They're both playing in some very morally ambiguous spaces, but I do need them to make each other more interesting.
So
Yeah.
do you both find that you like writing more realistic romantic stories, or do you like the unrealistic element because it kind of takes you out of reality for a second when you're reading?
Your turn,
Do you want to
Jodie.
take that one first? Oh, okay, I'll do it. I kind of like smashing them together a little bit. Like, I love to take a really, some romance tropes are ridiculous, brackets complimentary. I mean that in the best way. And it's like, okay, if this was really going to happen, what would that look like? Like, my new book coming out next year is a marriage of convenience book. And it's like, okay, let's think about the circumstances through which people might realistically come to do something as ridiculous as a marriage of convenience, as a wild and out there and such a like disproportionate reaction. What's a situation that would make them do that? And then once they've done it, what does that look like? Like taking the trope and being like, well, now let's play this out. I love taking high concept and doing it in a like a really quite mimetic, realistic space.
I love the challenge of taking a deeply stupid idea and trying to convince the reader that actually no, this could happen, and look what happens when this happens, and then this and this and this. I love the challenge of that.
Oh, I
Mm.
loved that about text appeal, actually. Like when Riley starts getting those texts, I'm like, oh, what are the odds that, she would get the hot guy's number from her same small town? And then I won't spoil what it is, but there's like a little explanation in there. And I was like, oh, Kylie knows what she's doing.
Are you allowed to tell us why in your next book they choose to do magic convenience, or not quite yet?
Yeah, I can probably tell you. I'm not quite sure when it will be out in the US yet, though it definitely will be out in the US. It'll be 2025 sometime. It is an academic because why write about something you have to research when you could write about something you know a lot about? An academic rivals to lovers, marriage of convenience story. It's going to be called An Academic Affair. And basically, we have these two rivals. They've finally made peace when, they kind of go for one last fight when a tenure track job comes up, the Australian version of tenure track anyway. One of them gets it, but they realize their contract has a provision for partner hire. And to make that work in Australian law, you have to sign, it's called a statutory declaration, a stat dec about the nature of your relationship. And they're like, okay, if we said we were dating, that is a lie. But if we say we recently got married, that's not. And so, yeah, it's to get a job because
That's
academic
fantastic.
jobs are a knife fight. So you get them any way you can.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of it.
Yeah, I have to say, both fake dating and marriage of convenience are like one of my favorite tropes. And I feel like what you said, Kylie, like you want to make the reader believe this could happen to them. And I 100% believe those could happen to me in the real world. I read something, I'm like, yeah, like that could happen.
It's so much fun doing a fish out of water, just throwing the heroine into this stupid situation and going, "Don't drown, bitch. Do your best. Come on." And her going, "Oh God."
Yeah. Like, I mean, how would you react if, like, what's another good romance example? Like, one of those ridiculous romance wills where it's like, oh, yeah, you absolutely have to live together in this chateau for a year, or, the cage will come down from the ceiling and your life will be over. Like, how would you literally react in that situation? Like, that's the juice. That's where the fun stuff is.
Yeah.
So, kind of speaking of your characters in both of the books, can you kind of speak on your characters' personalities, where you drew that from, and kind of like the challenges they face in both of them?
Hmm. Kylie?
I think Riley, the romance writer, is of course very bookish, and she doesn't mind some fun, but I think her life has been reasonably boring just because, like a lot of us, she's more living out her adventures inside her head. And yeah, again, it's that fish out of water thing. So really, but also I love the idea of in small towns. I live in a small town, and you go to the grocery store and it's 4 hours later, and really you just don't want to talk to people and hear any more gossip, and you just want to get that loaf of bread, but everyone knows everything. And I love the community aspect, that found family of everyone suddenly being in your face and caring about you and wanting the best for you. But is their version of the best for you actually a good idea, or is it just deeply stupid?
Mm. Yeah. I had to put down text appeal and like laugh for about 5 minutes near the beginning when she goes into the coffee shop and there's the two tip jars for Ava versus Riley. Like that
Made myself
killed
laugh at
me.
that.
So with Lily and Murray in Not Here to Make Friends, Lily is a villain, but if anyone who's seen reality television knows that the villain is like deeply performative. She's not someone that's been villain edited into being a villain. She's there courting being the villain. So I was like, okay, why? So on the surface, she seems like this really one-dimensional bitch. And like, don't get me wrong, she is a bit of a bitch, but she's a more complicated bitch than that. And she and Murray have this like really a long history that's very, very complicated. I won't spoil it for you, but they've known each other for a long time. And Murray, in many ways, is a really unromantic man because he thinks about love stories as mechanical because his whole job is putting them together. And so he tells himself he's unromantic a lot of the time. And I actually picked the name Murray for him because I wanted to pick a really non-romance hero name. And I was like, well, what's a not very romantic name?
I love
Murray.
that name. I love that name
Apologies to
so
any
much.
Murrays in the room. Yeah. It's half from Kath and Kim, which none of you in the US will know, and half from Murray the Red Wiggle, who's, I think you might know the Wiggles in the US. So he tells himself he's unromantic, but he actually is very romantic, and he is the king of pining, because that is something I personally find very romantic.
Yeah.
I love that. So, kind of jumping in, this is a question I like to ask a lot of authors, but Kylie, with your main character, they're a romance writer, and obviously you're a romance writer, and Jody, you studied a lot on The Bachelor. So was there a ton of research kind of involved, or was it a lot easier to create these characters where you already have knowledge to draw on?
Well, this was an easy one, being the romance writer, because it's like Jody was saying, I cheated on this one. I don't have to do any research. Usually I have to go read a bunch of Reddits about what it's like to be a chef or all sorts of interesting stuff. But actually being able to kind of drop in little bits about Romance Landia and how the community works and everything, that was really fun. I could flesh that one out really easily. And he's a mechanic, but I tend to write generally from the heroine's point of view, because I also like not being able to go into the hero's head and know exactly what he's thinking. I like the challenge of trying to show it. And so I I think that's a very real part of love too, is not quite knowing if the other person is returning your feelings, and sort of looking for those clues about what's actually going on between you. But yeah, career wise, this was an easy one. The one I'm working on now is a bit more true crime oriented, and the amount of documentaries and articles on ethical true crime and everything, I've had to cut back a bit. I started having really gnarly nightmares, but the research for romance can be fascinating, the strange things you wind up looking up. How about you,
Yeah.
Jody?
Well, can you tell us about the new one, or is it too soon?
I think I can. She it's she she didn't have much luck with her first boyfriend when she was 19. She chose badly, and it turned out he was a little bit murderous, and he's been in jail for almost 10 years, and she's still living in the small town where it all went down for important reasons. But a lot of people in the small town sort of have very set ideas of whether she wasn't involved. So I get to have lots of interesting discussions about true crime and all of that kind of area. I'm really enjoying it. It's really fun. It's great to do something different. I came up reading a lot of romantic suspense, So getting back into writing that one has been fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds so interesting. So when people ask me about Not Here to Make Friends, it's actually part of a trilogy. You can get them all in the US, but Not Here to Make Friends is the only one in print. And they're like, "Did you do any research?" I'm normally like, "Pff, no. I had this idea during a COVID lockdown in 2020, and I sat down and I started writing basically immediately." And then I'm like, "Oh, there was that whole like 5 years of my academic career before then when I published many, many journal articles on The Bachelor." So yeah, the research did factor in, but it's probably a little bit less evident in the romances between the protagonists themselves. In the show is called Marry Me Juliet in this universe, and so Here for the Right Reasons, the first one is a romance between the bachelor and a contestant he eliminates on the first night. Can I Steal You for a Second is a romance between two contestants, and then this one is villain and producer. So it's a little bit less evident in their like individual dynamics. But because all three books take place on the same season and they all take place concurrently, you can really see my like bachelor brain in the show itself. So instead of plotting each romance and then trying to fit them together, I plotted out the season of the show. And I was like, okay, where would these various people be at the same time? Where are they intersecting? And the romances kind of fell into place from there. So it was a knowledge of story structure, but that isn't actually the structure of the romances themselves, if that distinction makes sense. And it
You're
was
a
really hard.
timeline wizard.
Yeah, you should see my spreadsheet for this. It's really
Wow.
complicated. And with my new one, my publisher was like, no timeline things, Jody. If you're doing a trilogy, you have to do them in order. No more concurrent things.
I talked a
And I was like,
friend
well,
into
maybe a
doing
little bit.
I talked a friend into doing a 3-book series that all started at this one party. She still hasn't forgiven me. She said I caused way too much work.
Oh, yeah, no, it was really hard. And I am not a plotter by nature. I'm not like a full pantser, but I'm like I usually know a few places I want to go along the way and where I want to end up, but I don't always know how I'm going to get there. And because the three books fit together like this puzzle box, I really had to do some plotting and work against my own instincts in some ways.
Oh, it's going to be freedom and wind in the hair when you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, the new one, I was like, oh my God, what is this? I don't have to go and check my timeline every 5 minutes. Very much the feeling of like driving down the highway, you know, top down on the convertible. Very different vibes.
Wow. So do you both kind of appreciate the research process, like when you do have to do a lot of research, or is it more so kind of daunting when you know you have to do all this research for this one book?
I find it really fun. Generally, I find it interesting. And I'm like Jody, I'm sort of somewhere between plotting and pantsing. So it often sort of comes up as I'm going along and isn't generally in a big lump but getting to talk to people too who are maybe in that industry or live in that part of the world, and it's just fascinating. I guess that's part of being a storyteller. You want to hear other people's stories too.
Hmm. Yeah. I've realized because I do so much research in my day job, that I don't want to say minimize the amount of research I do. If I'm going to do in-depth research on something, it has to be something I really love. So my next book after Academic Fair is about wine. And so I've been, talking to a bunch of sommeliers and tasting a bunch of wine, and oh, just been so horrible for me. Oh no. So
Your
look out for,
life is
more
so
books
hard.
about like, yeah, it'll be like cheese, chocolate. Like we'll just go down the list of things Jody likes for the rest of my romance
Fantastic
writing
idea.
career. Yeah. Have you
Fantastic
had any
idea.
where the research has been like super hard in like an area that you were like, oh, did I really want to be researching this?
Yeah, I guess with the recent book, reading some FBI sort of hardcore serial stuff, how they approach all that and what the statistics are and everything, that can be a bit gruesome, but generally it's more interesting than gross. Generally,
Mm.
with the stuff we wind up learning about, you kind of wind up being a bit of a jack of all trades. It's the fun thing about picking and this character's going to do this,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
I love that. I feel like because you research so much, that's like good dinner conversations. Like, you know, these random facts about this field you're not even in. I feel like that would
Yeah.
be a good conversation.
Though the wine
Very
one has made
trivial
me
pursuit.
unbearable at dinner parties now.
You're like a wine connoisseur at this point.
Yeah, I'm like, let's do a tasting, Let me tell you about the different notes. What's the nose? What are the legs? And they're like, oh, shut up, Jody.
What I really need to see now is like the wines being paired with your specialty charcuterie boards. Jody is amazing at charcuterie boards. So I feel like there's a lot of area here to
Yeah.
be explored.
I'm making one this afternoon. So if you follow me on Instagram, you will be able to see, like, I don't know, in 12 hours, one of my creations.
You
They're
do
my
the
Love
pride
fancy
and
ones.
joy. Pardon?
You do the really fancy ones with all
Oh,
the
yeah.
with everything. Yeah. That takes time and effort. I feel like that's almost an art, being able to make a good looking charcuterie board.
I take
It
great
is for
joy
sure.
in it.
So, kind of switching gears, I would love if both of you could talk a little bit about how you got into the world of romance, what gave you the courage to write your first novel, and how that process kind of was.
Your turn to go first, Jody.
Okay, so we have quite a lot of authors in Australia who have PhDs. It's because of how our how graduate school works here. Basically, the terminal degree for creative writing isn't an MFA like it is in the US. It's a PhD here. So you'll have a lot of authors who have written several books who then go on to do a PhD. I'm the inside out version of this, where I was an academic first. So my journey coming to writing romance starts with me studying romance. And I when I graduated undergrad, I always knew I was going to go on to go to grad school, but I thought I was going to be an early modernist. I thought I was going to study like Shakespeare and Shakespeare's friends. And then I went and worked in the real world for a few years before I went back to university because grad students are broke and I wanted a nest egg. But I was really, really miserable, and I started going to Big W, which is like kind of our Walmart here, and just like cleaning out the romance section on my lunch breaks. And then I had this like epiphany where I was like, can I write my PhD on this? Is this allowed? And so that got me into the field of kind of romance academia, where I have been ever since. I'm now the vice president of the International Association for the Study of Popular Romance. But while I was writing my PhD, I also started writing my first published novel is actually kind of YA. We would call it romantasy now, but the term did not exist at the time. And because it was in that kind of more fantastical space, it was just that little bit different from my PhD. And it was what I did when I couldn't look at, we call it a thesis, what you would call a dissertation, when I just couldn't look at that anymore. But I wrote it and I was like, oh, this is just for me. This is just for me. And then I started shopping it around and eventually I got a book deal and I was like, oh, I guess I do this now. But my first foray into kind of adult rom-com, which was Here for the Right Reasons, which is the first book in this series, it was a lockdown baby. So Melbourne, where I live, was the most locked down city in the world in 2020. There was a period of 7 months where I didn't touch another human being. And I'm like, oh, that seems psychologically healthy. But we had a season of The Bachelor airing, and it was really bad. It was a bad season, and I had one of those like terrible thoughts where you're like, oh, what would you do, Jody? And I logged on to my like Zoom Friday night drinks with my friends because this is what we were doing in Melbourne in late 2020. And I was like, friends, I've had a terrible idea. I need you to talk me out of it. And they didn't. And now here we are.
That's fantastic. I've always been really obsessed with books and reading, not and notebooks, just books. And
Yeah.
about 15 or so years ago, I was running a florist shop, and you could have really busy days, but still wind up sitting there for sort of half the day and I thought, well, I've got to be here. I've got a computer. I always thought I'd maybe write a book, so I'm going to do that. And so I wrote it, and it was going to outsell the Bible. But funnily enough, I found out I didn't know what I was doing. And so I started I joined the local Queensland Writers Centre and Romance Writers of Australia. And yeah, I just spent some years working and getting the craft together. As for how I got into romance in particular, I was reading lots of fantasy, and I realized I really loved the relationships that were going on. And so I thought, well, this was during the paranormal heydays, Nalini Singh, and she's just fantastic. And it just all snowballed from there.
Yeah. Is your first book Flesh, the zombie one?
Yes, I wrote a post-apocalyptic zombie world. Mm.
Yeah. I love that book. Like it's the one with the throuple, yeah? It's great.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was fantastically fun. I burnt down a local city, and they just went adventuring. It was kind of a road. It's a road journey book, but
Mm.
oh, it was wonderful. It was
Yeah.
so great to do something weird. I love that about romance. We encompass all of the different types of stories, man. You can go everywhere
Mm.
with romance. Yeah.
Yeah. Like throuple zombie road trip. Like
Do you both find yourself, kind of now that you're in the adult romance kind of genre, do you find yourself wanting to branch out to those subgenres more? I know Kylie, you're branching out quite a lot, and Jody, you've written fantasy. Do you find you like adult like rom-com the most, or do you kind of want to branch out still?
I'm really enjoying doing kind of contemporary stories. My book Repeat had a bit of a suspense element to it, so it's just dabbling in that kind of area really again. Um, I have written half of a vampire book, which I need to finish next year. What about you, Jodie? Are you sticking with contemporary romance or?
I think I'll be here for the foreseeable future. Like Marry Me Juliet
Yeah.
is all contemporary, Academic Affair and its sequels will be contemporary. But I really learned a lot from kind of playing in that paranormal romance, romantasy space.
Mm.
And I don't think I would ever go like full secondary world fantasy. Like I'm not going to suddenly try and do like Fourth Wing or something like that. But I really like, there's a scholar of, sorry, this is really academic, sorry, but there is a scholar of fantasy I really like called Farah Mendelssohn, who talks about fantasy in kind of like there being four different types. So one where you kind of go out into the fantastical world. So like a lot of portal fantasy, like a Narnia. Immersive fantasy, where you're just kind of chucked into the fantasy world. So that's a lot of secondary world stuff. So like a Game of Thrones. Intrusive fantasy, where the fantastic kind of comes to you. So like Twilight is a pretty good example where you're just Bella living your normal life and oh, suddenly there's vampires. And then there's a fourth kind called liminal fantasy where you can just kind of see the fantastic out of the corner of your eye, but the promise is never really delivered on. It's just like you sort of know it's there. And my first trilogy, we'd call that intrusive. It was kind of small town Australia, but fairies. And that kind of clash, it's the same thing I was talking about before, where you take some kind of ridiculous situation and you're like, but how would I deal with that actually? That is something that fascinates me as a writer. So I might at some point play some more in that like intrusive space or even that liminal space where there are like little fantastical elements, but I probably wouldn't go like full fantasy, you know. And you will never get a crime novel out of me because I don't have the right kind of brain to plot that. I'm afraid you would guess who the murderer was so soon.
I
Oh,
love the word liminal. That's like one of my favorite words ever. Isn't it just the best?
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's a fun word, like, it's, very evocative, but it's also just a fun word to say. I think it's really
Yeah.
euphonious. It's like how Tolkien said cellar door was the most beautiful phrase. I'm like, I like liminal, though. That's a good one.
Good one.
no, I love that. That was very educational because I did not know there were so many like subgenres of the fantasy because usually I say you go into fantasy, you don't know what's happening for the first like 150 pages of the book because it's world building, it just drops you right in there. But I didn't even think that there's different levels to fantasy. Wow. And kind of speaking on the writing process a little bit more, what's kind of been the hardest thing with writing, any part of it? I know some authors don't really like the marketing side of their book, like having to really like put their book out there. Some authors find it harder to start the book. What has been your hardest part of the writing process?
Like I have
I'm
two, and one is kind of a jokey one, but my publisher has strongly encouraged me to be on TikTok. And because I'm also a university lecturer, my students keep finding me there, and that is a little bit, do I want to say embarrassing? They're like, "Oh, you said this on TikTok," and I'm like, "No, don't perceive me. Don't do that." But in terms of the hardest part, this book in particular was an absolute bastard to write, but particularly to edit. So because I had written the first two books in this series and they take place at the same time, I was like, cool. These are the most difficult characters I've ever written because they're so like in that morally gray space. They're not nice people, but I know exactly what's going to happen in this book. And the first two books in this series are single perspective from the heroine of book one, and then book two has two heroines, so it's just one of them. And this one was all Murray in the first draft because I always conceived of Lily as like this kind of trickster character who you could never quite get your hands on. And then when I turned in my first draft, my publisher was like, "What a great draft. So good, Jodie. It needs to be dual point of view." And I was like, I'm sorry? It needs to be what? And so part of the kind of driving force of this book is that Murray doesn't know what Lily is thinking. And I was like, but if we have her point of view, then no book, no work. What do we do? And she was like, still need her point of view though. And I literally didn't sleep for 48 hours. I was in such a like panic about how to fix this book. And at about 3 a.m. on the second sleepless night, I was like, oh, what if dual POV but also dual timeline? Murray in the present, Lily in the past, where we see the history of their friendship, so we know what she was thinking, but not what she is thinking. And thankfully, they let me get away with that. But doing all the work to add in an extra point of view, brutal. And then when I turned in Academic Affair, I was like, oh no, what are they going to make me do this one? And it was fine.
I would
That
have
one was
cried.
a million times easier by
I
comparison.
would have sobbed. I would have sobbed just on the basis that it might make them go, "Oh no, it's okay. We'll just accept it." It's always worth just
Mm.
God, another point of view. That's so hard.
Yeah, this one I'm like, no, we're going to have a discussion about how many points of view beforehand, and because I cannot give this piece of feedback again. Like it was just and I had to like rewrite an entire first year creative writing course at the same time. So there is a plot line in Academic Affair where the two main characters, Sadie and Jonah, have to write a lot of lectures, and please know that that is coming from my real life. Anyway, that's my author struggles. What are yours, Kylie?
Um, I tend to think of a really wacky, wild meet cute, and then figure out what characters would be the most interesting in that situation. And then I was just very pantsing it, but I realized as my brain changes a bit with perimenopause, my memory can't is having troubles holding a whole book in it like it used to. So I'm becoming a bit more of a plotter, which is interesting because I need that element of discovery. It's really a big part of how I work is learning more about the characters as I go along, and then I'll go in and add stuff. So it's been interesting to try to find that middle ground between plotting and pantsing. Marketing, it's one of those things I say I hate it, but I actually kind of like it when it's working. But sometimes you just run out of stuff to say. I find with social media, some days it's just really confronting and overwhelming, and you're like, I've got nothing. Just
It's like what I have is a cheese board.
what other
Buy
days
my
it's
book. I write
fantastic
nice
to have
cheese
the
boards.
community. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's writing is wild because it's such a varied job. You really running any small business, you wind up sticking your fingers in so many different pies. It's cool in a way because you get to keep learning, and the market is always evolving, so there's always new stuff coming and going. It's a fascinating job. It's the best job in the world. It's still work though. It's work. It's hard work.
Yeah, yeah. I always get really frustrated when I hear writers talk about how like, oh, the muse spoke to me and the words flowed through me. I was just a vessel. I'm like, no, you're not. You did some work. Own your own labor. Don't outsource it to some like airy fairy muse up here. Yeah, it's not magic, it's labor.
That's the funny thing when people go, "Oh, I've got a great idea for a book. You write it, we'll go halves." And like, bitch, ideas are
Yeah,
a dime a dozen.
yeah,
Writing that 60 to 120K words, that's hard.
yeah. And they're like, you don't understand. It's such a good idea. No one's ever thought of it before. And I'm like, oh, try me.
They have.
Yeah.
Have you found writing romance has given you a greater appreciation for the genre, or because it's now your part of your job that it's kind of taken away from like your love of it maybe, or your love of like reading it outside of writing it?
I mean, it was already my job. Like I study these for work. So I think it's kind of enhanced my appreciation because I really understand how hard it is to write a romance novel. And I mean, I don't think that's something that we devalue in scholarship at all, but like there's a difference between knowing in the abstract that writing a book is hard and knowing in your bones how hard writing a book is and how much thought and consideration goes into it. But also, a book is not necessarily the product of just the author. Like we have the tendency to think of the author as this like lone genius scribbling in the garret. There's so many people involved in the process, like editors and cover designers. And I mean, there often will be a few different editors involved at different stages. Like Not Here to Make Friends, I think there were like four at one point with kind of at different levels, different fingers in the pie. That's mostly because it went through 8,000 rounds of structural edits. But like it really is it's a more collective enterprise than sometimes we think of in scholarship. And so it's really enhanced my appreciation, not just for the work of authors, but also the work of everyone involved in the process.
I think that's really cool about any genre is the community attached to it. I feel like I love romance more all the time. And like I was saying, the market's always changing. I mean, who saw BookTok coming and romantasy, and it's always changing. And people are talking about, are we going to move into more horror romance, or what's next year going to be like? And there's always great new writers coming out and seeing things in different ways with different ideas. It's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really do think horror romance is going to be the next thing. That's my
It's so
like
much fun.
Yeah, that's my cards on the table. That's my prediction. I
Okay.
mean, I think it's such a natural match because they're so like bodily in some ways. And like, yeah, I hope that happens because I want to see what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you both been on like Instagram and TikTok and looked at like reels of people who make like edits of your books and the characters within them? Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a few. So there were a couple of campaigns that my publisher did with various like TikTok collectives for some of these books, and so people would tag me in all these like beautiful videos. It's how like I think being on TikTok taught me, this is my like one marketing piece of knowledge that I have gained, that it is helpful to be able to describe your book in a Taylor Swift song, and TikTok will tell you what it is. You're like, okay, what song are they using? Not Here to Make Friends is Mastermind. I think Academic Affair is going to be I Can See You, but we'll see what happens when it crystallizes.
Yeah. Some it's beautiful when someone is moved by your work. I mean, some of the best memories I have of growing up is just falling in love with stories and imagining what it would be like to meet those people or to live in that world or anything. So to have other people do that, it's just the most beautiful compliment.
Mm.
Mm.
I love that. Do you both find that it makes you nervous when like you put a book out into the world and now it's going to be like perceived by everyone in every which way? Or is it more of like a relief that you've finished with this and you're done for now?
It's both. It's terrifying and top tier anxiety, but it's also really good to just finally sit back and give it into the reader's hands. But
Yeah.
yeah, all releases. Wow, that's every emotion under the sun. Hmm.
Yeah. Like it was particularly intense for me for this one with this book. So it's my seventh novel overall, but because it was such a bastard to write, I was like, oh God, I worked so hard on this. If people hate it, this is going to crush me, like really crush me. But also, I was like, but it's done now. You don't have to work on it anymore. They can't make you add a third point of view. Like,
Is there a specific scene from Text Appeal and Not Here to Make Friends that like as you're writing it, you knew was going to be like a fan favorite amongst your audience?
yeah, for me, there is, and I was right about which one it is. I how many spoilers do I want to give? It's in the past for Murray and Lily, and it involves a washing machine
Hygiene is important.
being misused, shall we say?
Um, I I usually find when you're having the most fun writing it and laughing at your own jokes, those tend to be the scenes that people will come back and go, "Oh my God." And in Text Appeal, there are the three wise grandmothers who are just getting
I
high
love
at the
them. I
local
love them so
cafe and
much.
doing rude crafts and dishing out wisdom and discussing everyone in the town and getting in their business. And I just loved them. I loved writing them. It was so much fun.
Yeah. Oh, I actually have a second one. Like the one that I said before, the washing machine one, I knew the romance people were gonna like, but the one that like people who have come to this who aren't maybe like romance people, but who are Bachelor Nation, there's a bit where we flash back to a previous season where all the contestants unionize and vote out the Bachelor because they all hate him. And Bachelor Nation readers have responded to that scene very well.
You got voted off the island. Just go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. And they have to be like, okay, I guess we have to get a new Bachelor then.
I love that. As a Bachelor fan myself, that sounds amazing. And then kind of along those lines, do you guys find it easier and more enjoyable to write the like the banter, the cutesy stuff in your novels, or do you really like writing the kind of heavier, more emotional scenes, if you will?
They pay off in different ways, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
with books kind of play like a movie in my head. And so it's kind of fun to go, well, what is their next line? What are they going to say? And putting yourself, empathy is kind of a superpower in the writing and putting yourself in that situation. And yeah, it's an interesting process.
Mm. Like I think for me the banter flows easily, and also if you like good banter, you cannot go past the works of Kylie Scott, the queen of banter. Like the banter in Text Appeal is just like so on point. But yeah, I find the banter a little bit easier to write, but I think maybe enjoyment is the wrong word, but I really enjoy getting into some of the like more emotional territory because I think like this is also perhaps like an Australian cultural thing. As Australians, we're a bit embarrassed about feelings. We're like, oh, we're not a very sincere nation. Feelings of girls, yuck. And so, kind of getting past one's own cultural programming, as well as kind of thinking about how you can heighten the emotions and the drama and the yearning and the pining for these two characters. That's where the juice is. That's really interesting.
Yeah. I think finding that raw honesty and having the characters reach that point is it's fulfilling in a way that's really nice. Uh,
Yeah. And I find this is a pattern that recurs in a lot of my work where they really have to struggle to be honest with each other. And I think this comes from a deep-seated thing, partly in me, but also partly in Australian culture where we just don't like to talk about feelings. Difficult when you're a romance writer.
it's hard to put them out there. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
such an act of bravery. Yeah.
Mm.
Do you find writing for both of you a form of kind of like therapy? Like it's very therapeutic to kind of be able to like put all the feelings out on the page?
It was therapeutic for me to be able to fix The Bachelor in the way. Like I've been writing about The American Bachelor, but mostly Australian Bachelor for years and years and years. I wrote episode recaps of every episode here going back to 2015. So no one knows more about the problems with the Australian Bachelor franchise than me. And finally, I got to fix it. And that was delightful. And they still haven't hired me as a consultant, which is rude, frankly. Despite
Loser.
repeated pitches.
Um, sorry, can you repeat that question? Talking about memory blanking out.
Yeah, no, for sure. Do you find it therapeutic to kind of put all the feelings out on the page?
I've definitely worked through a couple of little injustices or moments. You know how when you think of the perfect line 2 hours after the conversation, it's really good to be able to go away and go, no, she says this. Yes. You you've got that power to finally go, yes, that was the great comeback.
Yeah. Yeah, my new book has got so many of my feelings about the broken higher education system, but like this time someone listened when she said the thing, you know?
Uh,
Someone was like, "Oh, your opinion might matter." Actually, what? Like,
I
that's
also don't mind
therapeutic.
smacking down the occasional ex-boyfriend. That
Oh,
has happened,
yeah.
but
Yeah,
only
like
only in a very, very professional manner.
yeah. I'm like, no one will know except you, but if you read this, you'll know.
So does that confirm that some of the characters in your book are based off of real life people and they will know? Don't mean to put you on the spot, but
Yeah. I mean, not like the full people, but sometimes you'll pull in a little detail or like a little nuance, and it's like, if you know, you know.
love that.
I
Like
feel
there
like
are jokes in some of my books that like three people will get maybe, but those three people will love them.
characters tend to wind up being an amalgam as what the story needs and what the drama will play into, but also little pieces of people that you've met and things you've thought over the years. It all kind of coalesces to make these characters in interesting ways.
Yeah,
Mm.
and I mean little bits of yourself as well.
Oh
Like when
yeah.
I was writing Not Here to Make Friends, I gave Murray my like some of my particular problems around workaholism and overwork. And when the first round of structurals came back, the editor was like, "Oh, reading this, I thought Murray had some kind of serious health condition. I thought he had a brain tumor." And I was like, "No, that's just what overwork feels like. Everyone knows that, don't they?" And that it was a real like come to Jesus moment for me.
Yeah, so kind of speaking on that in that same vein, is there a character from any of both of your novels that you both feel you relate to the most or kind of has your personality the most in them?
Yeah, I think it is Murray for me, an overworked, verging on middle-aged reality TV producer who doesn't want to admit he has feelings. Yeah, there is more of him in me than I had anticipated. He's not me, but there's like the Venn diagrams overlap, you know?
I would like to be Lena from Lead. She's so brave and in your face, and
She
I,
rules.
I love her. Yeah, I think it's more who I aspire to be than who I necessarily am.
You know, I would love to be Lily and Not Here to Make Friends. She's such a like fantastic bitch and is not scared to take people down. I'm like, oh, I wish I was as brave as Lily, even though she has some very other unhealthy characteristics.
That. So we actually also have a question from the audience. Someone in the chat asked if you guys could both talk on how you both came to know each other and how this like great friendship developed, and just kind of speak on that.
How did we meet? We would have met through Kate and Adele. We have,
Yeah, so I
yeah,
we've got some mutual friends. Did we
yeah.
maybe also maybe an RW Oz conference? We might have talked there.
I feel like that's, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have a very vivid memory of the first time I was handed one of your books, and it was Lick, and it was when I used to do some blogging for a digital publisher called Momentum Moonlight, and I was visiting their offices, and they were the publisher for Lick and Play and Lead and Deep. and they did a promo on the streets of Sydney where they had these men with tattoos handing out books, and they handed me a copy of Lick, and I
That
was
was
like, "Oh, what's
hilarious.
this?" And that
That
was my first
was,
encounter with Kylie Scott.
yeah, I think it's one of those ones we had friends in common, but we were also sort of all part of the Australian writing and book world on social media.
Mm.
And I just, the idea of studying romance, that just fascinates the fuck out of me. So, yeah, I can't
Actually,
even
maybe
remember.
we became friends on Twitter first.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah,
Yeah, Twitter
but I
was
mean, it
very
just
active
feels.
back then.
Mm. It just feels like we've always known each other, and
Yeah,
the because Australia population-wise is much smaller than the US. Like there is a little bit of a like everybody knows everybody thing going on, but we have definitely been good friends for like what, 10
years.
years maybe? Like it's a long time.
Yeah.
Can we expect a joint novel from you guys in the future? Is that in future plans?
I play that well with others. They-
Yeah. I mean, we could try. We might not like each other afterwards. But we do so many. We've been on like 800 different panels at different writers' festivals together. Like we're often paired together. Sometimes because they're like, oh, romance writers, who do I know? Kylie, Jodie. But also, I think, maybe people know we have a rapport.
Love that. I'll hold out hope. Maybe. Sure. And then kind of a switch up, but is there a moment in your career as an author where it was like your I made it moment?
Oh, yeah, for me, it was this year. It was when Not Here to Make Friends got reviewed in the New York Times.
Oh,
And
that's
like, yeah, it's the first book of mine that's been published in print into the US, and that's really difficult to do as an Australian author. Kylie Scott is an outlier as a big international success. But the feedback I'd been getting on my books for years and years and years was too Australian, too Australian, too Australian. And I was like, I don't really know what that means, actually. Like, it's not like I've got kangaroos hopping by all the time. Like, what does that mean? And I guess, with some ineffable quality. And with Here for the Right Reasons, the first book in this series, I was like, oh, maybe I can make this generic enough that it can trick some people. That didn't work. So I just kind of gave up. And you'll tell by the way Murray says mate all the time is kind of precision Australian. But then when this one was reviewed by Olivia Waite in the New York Times, suddenly it wasn't too Australian anymore, which was mysterious.
that's
But yeah, that
fantastic.
was a big like holy shit moment for me.
Yeah. I remember going after I'd published my first book, Flesh. I remember going to an Australian romance readers event in Brisbane, and someone came up to me holding a book and went, "Are you Kylie Scott?" And I went, "Oh my God, do you know who I am?" Just thinking, wow, someone I knew in theory people would read this shit, but someone actually read it. That's amazing. I had a very, very clear moment of wow, the story is actually out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, I
cool.
also think you've definitely made it when there are half-naked tattooed men wandering around the streets of Sydney handing out copies of your book.
That was a
Love.
very funny day.
And what do you both kind of think success means as an author? Is it just finishing the book? Is it when it blows up on social media? How do you define success when you're writing?
Mm.
There's writing success when you're happy with the book, and you feel like actually I wouldn't want to change that. I'm really that came together right for me. That story feels good to me. Monetary success is a whole different area. I think they're very, very separate, art wise and money wise. That's that's the thing with any creative is balancing those two and staying happy and keeping the muse engaged. What do you think, Jodie?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think if you measure your worth as a writer by financial success, you will probably never be successful. Like it is incredibly difficult to make a living as an author. The average wage for an author in Australia now is $18,000 a year, Australian dollars, so that's even less in US terms. And I'm pretty sure that data is skewed by the presence of like, I don't know, Tim Winton, Trent Dalton, who are big Australian authors on that survey. So yeah, you can't measure it in monetary terms, even though money's nice. I think for me, the moment when I feel like I'm most like conscious of that sense of achievement is the moment I hold the book in my hands for the first time. That thing like here is this tangible object that I have created and also it's finished like this. It's not like I think many other jobs you maybe never get quite that sense of closure that you do when you've written a book and you're like no, even if everyone hates this book, I still wrote it. I still finished the thing, and it is a thing that you can hold in your hands. Like that for me is always like the moment.
Do you both have a release day ritual, something that you do on release day of your book every time?
I try to get out of the house so I don't fixate on social media quite so badly.
Mm,
I try to go
yeah.
out somewhere for lunch. Yeah.
Yeah. I open a nice bottle of wine because I'm an unbearable snob about wine.
And what are some kind of current books you've read that have been your favorites, or if you have an all-time favorite book or favorite author, who is that?
So my all-time favorite author is Lucy Parker, who is a Kiwi author. If you have not read her London Celebrity series, bangers every single one. The first one is Act Like It, but you can start anywhere in this series, they're all good. Also her Battle Royale and Codename Charming, her most recent books are also just like divine and delightful. But two books that have come out this year that I've really, really loved, probably my like number one read of the year so far is a book called The Wedding Forecast by Nina Kenwood, who's another author who lives in Melbourne. And basically, it begins with our heroine, Anna, going away for a wedding weekend and staying in the same Airbnb as the bride, because she's the bridesmaid, the groom, the best man, who's her ex-boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend, pregnant girlfriend, and some random other friend of the groom who happens to be a super hot actor. And she's like, okay, I can handle staying in this Airbnb with my ex-boyfriend and his pregnant girlfriend if I don't have to share a bathroom. And then things go horribly wrong. And it's just like, oh, it's such a good book. But then another favorite book of mine this year has been Love Unleashed by Melanie Saywert, who is a Bigambul and Waka Waka woman. She's actually only the second ever Indigenous Australian author to have a romance traditionally published, and it's a beautiful book. She travels to New York. She is trying to work in publishing, but the only job she can get for a while is working at a doggy daycare, and it's like chef's kiss.
They were both absolutely fantastic. I tend to kind of be reading 30 books at a time and jump around a lot, but I'm really, really enjoying Let Me Love You by Alexandria House. It's about a single mum and someone who's in the rap industry, and it's just fascinating. I love it. I love the feel of it. The writing is so fresh and cool. And um, How to Help a Hungry Werewolf, talking of fantasy and horror, kind of moving along by Charlotte Stein. She's so much fun. I love her. I love her. Those are probably the two I'm really into at the moment.
I'll have to put all of these on my ever-growing TBR list that will be read eventually. And now that we're almost at time, I want to kind of just end off on a fun question. So, fan casting. Do both of you have an actor and an actress picked out that if your book was to be made into a movie, you would want this actor and this actress cast?
I have a big girl crush on Florence Pugh. Big girl crush. I love she has this authenticity to her and this edge that I just really love. Um, and I feel like Glenn Powell would do an amazing rendition of Connor. I think he would just be so good for angsty little baby in the kitchen cooking for her because he's worried she doesn't eat enough vegetables. I think that could be fun. What about you, Jodie?
Yeah, I haven't settled on like the perfect Lily. Though Eileen Huynh, who reads her in the audiobook, is really, really good. And I'm like, pick Eileen, she's amazing. But for Murray, there is an Australian actor called Luke Arnold. He's probably best known in the US for being in Black Sails, where he plays Long John Silver. And I think he would be a top-notch Murray.
He'd be incredible. He's got so much charisma.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Love that. Well, thank you both. I think we're at time. Thank you so, so, so much for joining me today and having this lovely conversation. It's been truly appreciated. And everyone, if you haven't gone out and read these two books, please go out and pick it up right now after this and read them and all of the backlists of both of these authors. They're two of our favorites here at LSA. So please, and thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for inviting us from the other side of the world.
I know it's kind of cool that it's morning there for you guys, and here in Chicago it's 7 o'clock.
It's snowing there. You're in snow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is a heat wave here. It is, I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit, over 100 here.
Wow. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. In spring?
Well, I mean, it's nearly summer.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
on that note.
Thank you. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And if anyone's here in Chicago, I hope you have a lovely end to your day. You again.